As Democrats focus on rebuilding their party, former Congressman Joe Kennedy is already doing the hard work. Welcome back to Defending Democracy. I'm Mark Elias. Let's get started. Welcome, Joe Kennedy, to Defending Democracy once again.
Mr. Elias, the fact that I'm back, I take as a good thing, right?
Well, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. I mean, if democracy had been successfully defended, I might be able to hang up this and go do something else.
I think you've got job security, my friend. So,
yes.
Sadly. Yes.
So I want to start in 2021. So Joe Biden wins the election. He becomes president, and you decide to start Groundwork, which focuses on sort of the challenges in Appalachia and rural America. Talk to me about that decision at that point. And then I want to bring it to the current challenges that are faced in those communities. But sort of talk about how that decision you made and sort of how that time period reflected needs that even those of us who thought a Democratic administration might solve some of those needs, that still existed.
So thank you and love to. And you're kind of the way you frame it, that the obvious thing that you know well is, one, I lost an election. So I had some soul searching and some thinking to do. And I got elected to Congress when I was relatively young, in my early 30s. And the illustrious Chuck Schumer is rumored to have said that he served in the House Majority, House Minority, Senate Majority, and Senate Minority, and only one of them sucked.
That sounds like Chuck, by the way.
So there you go. I can tell you I know which one that was. And it doesn't take very long in the House Minority to recognize that there ain't much you can do when it's a majority-driven institution. They could just get to run roughshod over you. So, we're sitting there in 2013, and folks are saying, hey, we're going to win back the House. And I look at that map, and I go, we need this many seats, and this is a map. And, you're just not likely to do this because, as you remember very well back then, Republicans gerrymandered the heck out of the maps.
Yeah.
And Democrats were caught flat-footed after this massive change in 2010 that came in 2008, 2010, the 2010 redistricting that happened. So I'm sitting there going, we're not likely actually to retake the House anytime soon. So who's focusing on the longer term, essentially setting up to that next round of redistricting 8-9 years away? And the answer was, well, nobody.
Right.
On the left, nobody. On the right, of course there was, but on the left, nobody. The DCCC's job was to try to win the House this year. The DNC's job was to run for the next presidential campaign. The Senate's job was to win these Senate races. Nobody was focused on the long-term power build that you need to do in order to win these places. So I way back when, Mark, I was running around the country for a lot of other folks, campaigning for them for all sorts of different races. But even for me, I went to West Virginia campaigning, and I went to a bunch of other places that some folks don't often go. The only person that ever asked me to go to Alabama was John Lewis for the celebration of Selma. Nobody ever asked me to go to Mississippi. Nobody ever asked me to go to many places throughout the Midwest. And you realize then that, hey, if the Democratic map is shrinking in terms of places we can be competitive, it means the conservative map is expanding, which means has particular challenges for an electoral college and a presidential campaign, because as that map expands, our pathways to victory narrow. And so started Groundwork to say, hey, the Democrats are focused so much on these swing states and a blue wall. And look, in 2020, we won. So, on the one hand, great. On the other hand, long term here, this isn't actually a bet we can win. And it also happens that, there's Democrats in Mississippi. There's Democrats in Alabama. There's people that, by the way, don't have any party affiliation that are still sentenced to 2 years worth of boil water notices in Jackson because the political structures aren't designed to fix it. And if you believe that politics is about trying to solve people's problems, and the system is set up such that now they are not going to fix those problems, then you got to change that system. So that's what we found a Groundwork to do. And we picked some of these kind of hard places, somewhat by design. So part of it was because a dollar can go a lot further in the Mississippi Delta than it can in Detroit or in North Carolina. And so these regions that we identified, the Plains, the Deep South Appalachia, we picked 4 states to start: Alabama, Mississippi, Oklahoma, West Virginia. And the main thing that we do is we support organizers in these places that aren't running out there saying, hey, go vote Democratic, change the flip a seat. They're running to say, we got a problem in our community we're trying to solve. We're bringing people together to actually try to do what we need to do to address the needs of a community. And I'll finish this part on this part. The best definition of government I ever heard was from a guy you know well too, and my predecessor in office, Barney Frank. He said lots of memorable things, but on this one, he said, "Government is simply the name we give to the things we do together." Right? Like that's it. It's people sitting around a table trying to solve a problem, and that table could be in Washington D.C., it could be in the Roosevelt Room of the Oval Office, or it could be around a school board, right? Or it could be in a local kitchen, and people coming together to bring neighbors together to try to solve a problem like some company poisoned a creek, or our kids aren't getting the funding that they need for schools, or we still after 2 years have to boil water in our kitchens. So how do we bring people together to solve these problems? And if we can do that, that's not Democrat or Republican. That's trying to make sure we can be there for each other. And then you can build back up from that to a place that actually has a responsive and accountable democracy, which is what you're fighting for.
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on at this moment, because it feels like at every turn, the Democratic Party writ large is actually in the place that you worried we would be in, right? I mean, like the Senate has become extremely hard for Democrats. You know, I have hopes for 2026, but let's be honest, it's a harder, everything you worried about in 2013 about that has in the Senate really magnified. In the House, it is also magnified. You know, we talk a lot about the scourge of gerrymandering, and that is a real scourge and is something we really have to pay attention to. But the other part of that makes that possible is the wide swaths of the country that it is just very hard as a Democrat to run for election. And you know, one anecdote that I'll share that has you know tied to both your current work, your family's history, and my work for presidential campaigns. In 2004, when I was representing John Kerry's campaign, it prior to that it seemed inconceivable that a Democrat wouldn't win West Virginia. I mean, people have a hard time remembering this, but there was a period of time, essentially from you know the early 1960s to the early 2000s, when West Virginia was a solidly Democratic state. You know, Robert Byrd was a senator, Jay Rockefeller was a senator. They barely had competitive elections most of their times, and Democratic presidential campaigns competed. And now you look at West Virginia. I don't know. You probably will correct me of those four states. But I think there's a good argument that West Virginia is now the hardest of those states.
Without question.
Yeah, and so you know what, I don't want to ask you to answer the impossible question that nobody has an answer to, but sort of how did we get here and what is the path forward?
Oh, I got to answer to both those questions.
Okay, great.
So look, I mean, how did we get here? You know, you start chasing the urgency of now, and there is an urgency of now, right? I mean, right, those famous words written by Martin Luther King when he was in a Birmingham jail, right? Like there is an urgency of now. But if you don't also understand the system and the system that you're operating in, the urgency of now translates into a long, hard slog to dig out of the pit that we put ourselves in. And that means, you know, if you aspire to be a place where every voice matters, every vote counts, every person should be heard, then you can't just say, you know, to get to 270 or 271 and then be done. I mean, what you articulated a second ago saying, you know, there used to be senators in these places. It's gotten so much harder. Back in 2008, the Democrats had 60 U.S. senators.
That's right. That's right.
60, right? So, like, it wasn't so long ago that the filibuster on the left shouldn't have mattered because you had enough votes to actually beat it.
That's right.
And yet, we're now in a position today where we sit there and go, gosh, there's, you know, maybe in the best of circumstances, you top out at 50 or 51, you know, given which seats are in cycle, maybe 52 if you can get there, but like that's hard. Why? And the reason why is it has become harder to win these races for a Democrat because in parts of the country, what you are carrying with you, despite the fact that we've got some great candidates, you find me a better candidate in Montana than John Tester. Right?
That's right.
It's not about who John Tester is or the representation that he provides. It's about what he has to carry and the perception of that party for people in Montana. And the challenge there is you get pulled away from the people we're supposed to be advocating for. And you have to build up and nurture and invest. You know this better than anybody. Democracy is a muscle, right? And you can't let it atrophy and then expect that in times when it's needed and necessary, it's just going to pop back up and go. So what do? you invest in these places, which means you go to places and you listen to people. And if I read one more story in some of these national publications that you and I both love about what Democrats have to do, like politics can be complicated, no
Yes.
question. And
Politics is complicated.
politics is complicated on the one hand, yes. On the other hand, like the word is pretty simple, right? It's about people, like literally, right? Going back to the Greek, it's about people and meeting people where they are. And when you find candidates that can meet people where they are, whether that is narratives of grievance, whether it is aspiration, whether it is, you're seeing folks on the right champion this, right? You're seeing folks on the left, a young candidate in New York that, has spurred a lot of conversation on a Democratic Party. But what did he do? He ran a digital first campaign talking about issues that matter to people. And you know what he did? He won a primary. So what does that mean? Does it mean like the Democrats go adopt the policy platform of Mamdani? No, I'm not advocating that per se. Do I advocate the fact that if you've got a candidate out there that is aspirational and has a driven work ethic that is able to listen to people that in their communities and try to craft policies and a vision based upon what he hears, like, yeah, why is that earth shattering? Every Democrat should be doing that. And that means it's going to be a different narrative in West Virginia. And the reason why it's so hard in West Virginia, you alluded to this, is anybody can go to Alabama or Mississippi and talk about the fact that the representation there, particularly if you are poor, particularly if you are a person of color, black, has been difficult and intentionally so put in place
Right.
since their state constitution since 1890, right? Out of Reconstruction, deliberately so. And people understand it because it's true. You can't really say that in West Virginia, right? Because it was Democrat. It was the state house there was 80% Democrat 25 years ago.
Wow.
So
Listen to everyone. Listen to that. 80%.
roughly, yeah. And so when I walk into West Virginia, it's not like, hey, we've been subject to these structures here that it disempowered the Democratic Party. It's we were with you for 60, 80 years, and then you walked away from us. I mean, the story, Mark, that I tell folks of one of many that stick with me from these travels. It was now a couple of years ago, but I was down in outside of Charleston, and this young environmental organizers taking me around to these, as they called, sacrifice zones, right? These places that have been so poisoned and polluted by big corporations that they essentially have been sacrificed, and people can't live in them, can't drink water, can't soil's contaminated, all the rest of the stuff. Terrible. And he takes me on a tour for about an hour around Charleston of these different examples, and it's awful. He does a very nice job of explaining what happened in the history and how it happened, all the rest. And we pull back into this little park, brownfield, that they now capped and put a park on top of. And I reach out, remember, young environmental organizer, probably in his early 30s. And I reach out to shake his hand and say, hey, thank you very much. I'm really grateful to you, and good luck. Let me know how I can help. And he looks at me and he goes, hey, can you ask me a question? Sure, I can try. He said, how come you Democrats think we don't know how to work? Young environmental organizer in West Virginia will not claim the title of Democrat. Okay? So, give me a little more. He goes, the only thing that you talk about when you talk about West Virginia is that we need to be retrained. We got the hardest working workforce, most talented workforce anywhere in the world. We built the industrial might of this country. I don't need you to tell me that coal mining is dangerous. Generations of my family did it. We sacrificed for our country, and we are proud of that sacrifice. So how about instead of telling folks here that we don't know how to work, how about you start with a thank you? And then you say, what can we do to help? Mark, I give the guy a hug and said, where have you been for the last 5 years? Right? Because, of course he's right. Right? This is not about coming in with some white paper and diagnosing people saying, hey, you've got a problem. It's about saying, hey, you've got a vision for your future. Let's help support you so that you can realize it. Right? He never said the future of energy is coal. He never said global warming is false and climate change ain't real. Of course he's not. He's just saying we have been given so much and exploited so badly. Help us determine what is best for us, not becoming a nurse and moving to Pittsburgh. Why is that a hard thing to do? You got to listen.
So I'm curious because I suspect, though you're no longer a member of Congress, you know your old district pretty well, you know the state of Massachusetts pretty well, and now you know these other states as well, and you've traveled around the country. And something Steve Bannon has repeated that originated with Andrew Breitbart has really stuck with me, that I'm starting to, or not starting to, I have come to really believe, which is that politics is downstream from culture. That it is that we as Democrats, we are like, they are trying to cut your Medicaid. That we want universal pre-K. Like, we come in with policy perspectives and policy solutions, and I wonder whether part of it is that we are not, we don't lead with culture. And the reason why I asked about your former district is that, you know, we've also seen among working class whites in traditionally very democratic places in the Northeast also become more disaffected with the Democratic Party. You know, the election results in 2024, sure, you know, Kamala Harris won New York, New Jersey, you know, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, but you did start to see some erosion, some significant erosion there as well. I wonder if you see a culture, even though the culture, and by the way, even though cultures are very different, by the way, in West Virginia than they are in the Mississippi Delta, and than they are in, you're going to tell me you didn't have South Bay Boston, but you know, in Boston, you know, like I wonder if you see some connection there.
Of course, there's connection, right? And culture in the Mississippi Delta might be different than in West Virginia. It's extractive, right? They've been extractive for a long time. It's been based upon literally what can people do to help business rather than how can society invest in people, right? There was a New York Times op-ed a couple years ago, Mark, that talks about the evolution of the term, or the genesis of the term redneck. And I had always assumed that it was from people toiling in the sun and getting a sun.
Right, that's me too. Yeah.
And this piece actually said otherwise. It was from a coal strike in West Virginia. And the company decided to try to crush the strikers. And the representatives of the company got guns and it turned violent and started shooting people. And then they hired airplanes and they shot their workers from the air. And the workers fought back. And the way they identified the workers is they put a red bandana around their neck. Became a redneck. Capital versus labor, a place in West Virginia fighting for like basic dignity and workers' rights, and they feel like we've left them behind. The longest strike, I think, of late in recent history in America was a coal miner strike in Alabama.
Right.
And I've got the bumper sticker here that they gave me still when I went down there, form that their local chapter president gave me. It said 1 day longer. And this was an old company town that price of coal took a dive. The family was going to lose the mine, and so the town was going to go bankrupt. And the union went in and took a pay cut and a benefit cut in order to keep the town afloat. Price of coal eventually recovered. The family sold the company. And the union then went back into the new owners and said, hey, can you restore the benefits and the pay? And they said no. And so these folks went out on strike for 2 years. And not a single national Democrat went down there.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. And I wonder why that is. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because it was the coal industry? Like, why do you think that was?
I think it's rural Alabama. And like, there's, you know, for folks that are sitting in office, I mean, listen, I was in office too, right? Like, you're busy and you got a million demands on your time, and the demands are all urgent, and you got a family back home, and you got people you got to raise money for, and you got votes, and you got a million different things. And so the prioritization of, hey, of that laundry list that you can never get to, you know, a direct flight, which doesn't exist, but a flight, and then another flight, and then a 2-hour drive, and then what are you going to do? And then you're going to come back. And by the way, when I went out there and met with those guys, you know, there's probably 100 folks around a ballpark, right, a Little League field, setting sun. It was a beautiful spring evening. 2/3 of the folks were wearing Trump gear, right? And the union head started by saying, listen, I ain't a socialist, but, you know, the Democratic Socialists just raised 10 grand for your families on a Zoom, right? To request of Bernie Sanders. So, like, you know, somebody's trying to help us. And credit to Senator Sanders, right? But, like, you know, my concern was that a Republican was going to come down, national Republican was going to come down, and thankfully they didn't. right? But like, it's a great example of, hey, if you spend the time and show that you care, right? But they're not going to, showing up there doesn't mean they're going to believe you or credit you or listen to you or vote for you. But you're never going to get their vote unless you do. Right? You're never going to build that back to say, like, look, you count, right? Which is what the underlying message of the Democratic Party for years has been, hey, you count. We see you. We hear you. We want you on our team. You matter. But then we say, well, some people do and some people don't, like by our own prioritization. And that's the part that gets me. Your point a second ago, Fall River, Massachusetts, part of my old district. My last primary before I ran that Senate race, I won 95-5. Right? Like I did pretty well across the
I think 95-5. I think you did pretty well.
We did all right, right? Fall River, Massachusetts, their vote share for a Democrat for president had gone down every cycle since 2004 and John Kerry. So Fall River finally this cycle voted for Donald Trump. And people in Massachusetts freaked out and said, how could that happen? If you hadn't been paying attention to the last 20 years, it's a shock. If you have been paying attention to the last 20 years, like they showed you warning signs every cycle saying, hey, something ain't working.
Okay, so take a median voter in that community.
Yeah.
Why is that? Is it policy? Is it culture? Is it the candidates? Like you were an attentive congressman, right? So it wasn't that you weren't showing up. Like what is it?
It's all of it, right? So look, you can earn their trust by showing up and by listening to people, but again, this is all anecdotal, but a good story for you. Down at an old textile mill, right? Fall River used to make a whole bunch of kind of it was an old low-cost manufacturing hub, right? So they used to make a bunch of these textiles. An old mill, they're like much of New England did. So we're in this old mill, big old beautiful building, beautiful bones to it. It's probably a third full, and we're up on this wooden floors, wooden beams. We're up there, and there's a bunch of seamstresses there, all of whom English is their second language. They're all lawfully and legally immigrated to the United States, but a big Azorean and Portuguese population in that part of southeastern New England. And they're all sewing stuff, blankets and stuff together. And above them hangs an American flag. And above the American flag is a T-shirt. And the front of the T-shirt says NAFTA with a circle and a line through it. And the back of it says, don't send my job to Mexico. Hmm. And the folks that were in that store or in that mill had been coming to work underneath that American flag and underneath that T-shirt for 30 years, right? The owner of the mill I'm talking to, and he said, look, every floor of this place used to be packed. We were actually a contractor for Walmart for some widget they had. And one of the worst days of my life was when we got undercut by a penny. And all of those jobs, that contract immediately went to someplace offshore. And I had to go and fire hundreds of people. And it was the worst day of my life and worst day of many of their lives. And if you could offer me the chance to get that Walmart contract back today, I wouldn't take it. Because there's no way I could go back and look those families in the eye if I got undercut by one penny anywhere else in the world and take those folks' livelihood away. I'd rather not have them. And so is it culture on the one hand? Sure. Is it policy? Sure. But the main piece of it, Mark, is like, do you give a shit and do you understand the repercussions, the consequences? Unintended, perhaps. But, part of this isn't just like, hey, trade ended up eroding the middle class. There were massive gains from it. We didn't tax people. We still don't.
Yeah.
There's people that made massive fortunes off of it, and we never invest that back, right? Walton family is one of the richest families on the planet, right? We don't invest that back into people to try to address it, right? And part of that for folks that say, well, hey, the Waltons should do more. Well, maybe we could raise the minimum wage.
Right, which hasn't been raised in how many years?
And so if you can't put the obligation on a company to willingly raise a wage that a political democratic process is unable to do because we are captured by interest. So yes, and some of that might be corporate capture. I don't want to get in that fight with anybody. Like, I agree. But putting that altruism on a company, like, folks, we have a process here to try to hold power to account, and we are not doing so. And part of that is capture by a Republican Party. Part of that is an attentiveness to the Fall Rivers of the world, because the political power in Massachusetts isn't in Fall River, Massachusetts. It's in Boston. And the driving cost of doing business in Boston isn't, in fact, energy or the cost of low cost labor. It's in Boston, it's rent and talent. And so what do you hear from people here? Hey, we need, different issue now, but back then we needed more lab space. We got plenty of it at the moment, but we needed more access to more talent. We needed more immigrant visas. We need to bring more people in. That's not the issue that they're saying in Fall River. It's energy rates are so high, they're putting us out of business, and we're going to move to the Raleigh-Durham Research Triangle because it's cheap. Right? But that wasn't, the folks in Cambridge, in Kendall Square, aren't picking up and moving down there, right? They need all the PhDs from MIT they can get, and they can't get an MIT down in other places. So they're here. But that, when you have a system then that concentrates power just in economic, political, media, cultural power in Boston, that isn't then responsive to what happens in the rest of the state, guess what you get? Policy comes out here, and for folks in Fall River and in Lawrence and in Pittsfield and in Worcester and in Springfield, they sit there and go, the reality that you're talking about is not my reality. Right? Folks in Charleston understand that, hey, Pittsburgh's gone through a transition, but inside or outsider dynamic in West Virginia is powerful. You got to spend time with people, show that you care before you can actually open up the doors and build a relationship with them. Like that point, people are still people. Right?
So do you see this as, I was going to ask you a question, which was if you were running for president or you were the chair of the DSCC or the DCCC, what would you do? But listening to you talk about it, there is this kind of like short term, like if you're running for president, you're trying to win 270 electoral votes. If you're Susan Del Bene or you're Kirsten Gillibrand, you're trying to win the chamber now. And it sounds like what you're saying is that those two may be in tension in going to that factory in a red part of a blue district, or for that matter, going to a state, going to a coal mine strike in Alabama. Like, is it just that those two are in temporal tension, or is it more than that?
So it's more than that. I actually don't think they are in tension. I think there's a prioritization there.
Okay.
And there's different jobs here, right? What a conservative movement has done so well, Americans for Prosperity, Koch Industries, et cetera, right? Koch umbrella, was recognize that politicians got to win races. Like, that's their job.
Right.
Trying to get them to do something different is that's not their job, right? Tom Brady's job was to throw touchdown passes.
Right.
It wasn't to tackle running backs. He wasn't so good at tackling running backs. Not his job, right? Throw touchdown passes. Politicians win races. We are going to set up an entire different infrastructure to play for the long term, right? Recent New York Times piece on our work highlighted the fact that Americans for Prosperity, Groundwork is now in 4 states, trying to mobilize a couple $1 million a year to support these local organizers. Americans for Prosperity, for the best that they could ascertain, is in 35 states and are going to spend nearly $190 million this year.
Jesus.
$190 million in 35 states, and they've been doing it, by the way, for decades.
Right.
Right. So they're not asking Steve Daines to go do this. They're not asking who's ever running the NRSC to do this or NRCC to do this, right? It's a separate thing because you can't ask the person whose job it is, Senator Gillibrand, whose job it is to try to make the Senate competitive and win all these races and defend these races this time, to also go do the long-term build. You can't, she can't be in two places at once. Neither can Ms. Del Bene, right? So the question becomes, how do we set up a system that actually invests in that and lets people know you care? And yes, all the better if you can get some elected officials to come down and prove that out. But you don't have to have one person doing all of these things. And look, if I were, if you're an elected official that's trying to win a race, you try to win a race. Part of my point to folks, though, is that if you had the contestants for president that went down and met that young environmental organizer the way that I did, and you heard his response, I bet you they would frame some of those issues differently. The way that they talk on climate. They wouldn't back off the impact of climate change because it's an existential threat to the planet. He didn't back off it either. But he did say thank you. Right? I don't know if you've ever been out to the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. It's an amazing place, by the way, if you've never been there. And it's obviously got this whole tribute to Americana and Ford and what it is. You will find if you ever go there, Mark, and you would love it. The thing is literally built up around some railroad tracks. And in the middle of one of the buildings there They have the largest locomotive I have ever seen. It's gigantic. And they built the thing around this locomotive. And I asked the guy, I said, where, what, like, how did that get here? He's
Right.
like, the tracks. Clearly, dumb question. I was like, well, what's the story? And he said, this was one of the locomotives we had hauling coal out of the Alleghenies to bring it right here to this factory. And, you had like aluminum, steel, and coal that would get dropped off here, and 12 days later, out spat a car. But that's what it was. And there's 250,000 people that worked at these factories at one point, right? But you see this thing, and it is literally awesome, right? Of just like how the power of it and what it pulled and what it meant, and the 250,000 people at the factory. We don't see that in many places anymore around America. The pride that it instilled, just jaw dropping that it looks at, right? It's like the only other time I've seen that around American manufacturing was like looking at a space shuttle and looking at an aircraft carrier. We just go, how in God did somebody build this? So like, we have candidates out there who can do this. Alyssa Slotkin understood that. She won, right? But what do you got to do? You have to have some appreciation for what people have done and what they've sacrificed and what they've tended to build. And the last piece I would say on this, parroting my wife, because she's better at most things, including this, than I am, right? I do believe that if Democrats can get back to one thing, it's remembering that, like, what unites is still stronger than what divides, despite all of Trump's just brilliant effort at dividing people in this country. But that almost every person I've ever met wants the same two things. They want their life to matter, and they want a better future for their kids. And if you can start with that, like the most conservative Republican wants that too, right? People all over the world, all around the world that I've met. I've never gone to a place in the United States, in Africa, and Asia, anywhere, where if you pick up a ball and throw it at a kid, they don't pick it up and throw it back, right? Like, people are people. Start from that and build. That's not about, you don't start with Medicaid, as important as Medicaid is. But you start with, if you want a better life, your life to matter, you get meaning out of building a better life for your kids. How do we do that? Should they be healthy? Well, if so, right? If they have access to food, great. Start there.
I'll be right back with more of my conversation with Congressman Joe Kennedy in a moment. But, in 2020, I started Democracy Docket to cover voting rights and free and fair elections. But now, with Donald Trump back in the White House, it has expanded to cover everything you need to know about democracy and his attack on it. But in order to do that, it needs to continue growing. And that means its 20-person team needs to grow as well. Please support their work by becoming a premium member now at the link above or in the description below. So let me ask you about the change in how Americans view politics. I grew up in a household in which, a Jewish immigrant household, in which there was actually various tributes to members of your family, to President Kennedy. There was I always tell folks in my bedroom growing up, I had a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. and a little bust of President Kennedy. Your uncle, Ted Kennedy, much later, when I first came into politics, was viewed as this iconic figure in Democratic politics. Is it just the media? First of all, maybe you're going to tell me it was never that gauzy and unified to begin with. But is it that the media has changed? But it just feels like there is such, Republicans had Ronald Reagan, when I was growing up, where there was this just kind of like iconic sense of someone embodying, in their view, the virtues of the Republican Party. Is that just gone because like that, there's no longer a unified media, there's no longer kind of a unified culture, there's no longer a sense of unity within parties, across parties, whatever? Or is there something different about how people campaign for politics now? Do you know what I mean? Why does it seem like there used to be more unifying figures within political movements than there are now?
So, look, I can give you a theory on that, but so I guess 3 points, right? One, I think it's a bit of both. Right? Um, it is harder to create that thread that connects folks when you're contesting different facts, right? When
Right.
the sky isn't blue and the grass isn't green, and like the basic premise here is different, and that's what happens when you have a fractured media and people don't trust then the media that you're seeing and receiving. Right? And so like it's hard. It is 100% harder to try to build that trust and have the credibility with an audience. And it's easy for me to point that finger at the right and say like that's what happens and Donald Trump, all the rest of it, and that's true. But also say that look, if Tucker Carlson came into Cambridge, Massachusetts, and tried to give a town hall, there's not a whole lot that he could say that I would think is necessarily true. Like I just don't trust him.
Right.
So like that is what it is today. So we have to acknowledge that and find a way through it. That being said, some of those universal truths that I believe are universal that I articulated earlier, I think are the place to build from. I think. I do think, though, that I don't believe that this means like, hey, democracy is great, it was a good run, hello
Right.
authoritarianism, it's all over. That's not the case. And I actually take a fair amount of hope and inspiration on that one, Mark, from kind of two things. One, short term, like I do think that part of this was during COVID, we told everybody to go home. They couldn't do much. They went to online because they didn't have that much else to do.
Right.
Down a rabbit hole, and then trying to get them back out of that rabbit hole is hard. And the way that you have to get people out and start re-engaging with society is you get them to re-engage in society. You have to have more community events. You have to have those spaces that people come together and mix and like reconnect with basic human beings rather than avatars and bots, right? That you think is what's pushing stuff online. So like we need actually an investment in our communities to actually help create that mixing and that revival. I will say the place that gives me actually, hope and inspiration out of this going forward is probably one that you haven't thought of in this way, but it's actually Northern Ireland.
I was gonna ask you about that.
So maybe you have thought of it. I spent some time there, obviously, as special envoy under the Biden administration, and
This was so everyone knows. This was 2021 and 2022.
2022 to 2024.
Sorry, 2022 to 2024. Okay, go ahead.
All good. So I'm over there a bunch doing the kind of trying to figure out how and at the request of the president, which by the way the position has been filled by every administration since Bill Clinton, right? On a bipartisan basis. President Trump, his first term, had somebody in this position. They haven't had somebody yet, but hopefully they will. And again, bipartisan basis, right?
This was George Mitchell, right? Wasn't he the?
Yes, George Mitchell helped, win a Peace Prize for it. Although he didn't win it, but
Right.
they brought on through Mitchell's engagement and advocacy, they were able, and the rapport that he was able to build across a whole bunch of different fractured communities there. He helped bring about the Good Friday Agreement, Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which ended the period understatement of the century by a typical Irish understatement, the Troubles, which was a 30-year guerrilla civil war, which was just vicious and awful and terrible in every way, right? The hallmark, every hallmark of a divided society, Catholic, Protestant, as I say, Unionist and Nationalist, Unionist, pro-Britain, Nationalist, pro-Irish, and a region, ultra divided, that goes back not just 30 years, but hundreds of years before. Northern Ireland today, right, 27 years after this agreement, has the lowest unemployment rate in the UK, just over 1%. It's the happiest region of the entire UK. It's the number one destination for cybersecurity investment in the United States. For U.S. firms in Europe is Belfast, Northern Ireland, believe it or not, right? They just hosted the British Open last month. Hundreds of thousands of visitors coming through Northern Ireland. I doubt any of whom gave any thought to what was taking place there 3 decades ago, right? So Northern Ireland, despite where it was 3 decades ago, if you went there today, no Protestant would think to tell a Catholic you can't be Catholic. No Catholic would think to tell a Protestant you can't be Protestant. No Unionist would tell somebody, hey, you can't be nationalist, or nationalist, you can't be Unionist, as much as they might advocate for their position and perspective. They have found, and again, this is messy, this is not over, right? Everybody has to work on this. But they have created a place where they can protect identity, your identity about it is okay to be who you are and have those beliefs. But if it's okay for you to be you, it's okay for me to be me. And then to try to build community on top of it, because you might be a Catholic and a nationalist, and I might be a Protestant Unionist, but both of our kids deserve a safe place to go to sleep tonight. and they deserve a good school to go to. And we actually need a healthcare system that works. So we don't have to solve Ireland and England stuff today. Let's solve let's get healthcare today. And again, the biggest piece on that, if you want a better and safer future for your kid, then I need to know that I can have a better and safer future for mine. And if a better and safer one for my kid means I have to actually help create that for yours so that you will help create that for mine, we're willing to do it. And I heard that over and over and over again from folks that, again, traditional understatement, were active in the Troubles, which means all sorts of different things, but none of them particularly warm and rosy. For folks that were, involved in those Troubles then, but are willing to put that aside because they got a kid now and that kid is what they care about. And if you want that future for your kid, I have to have that future for mine. So if they can do it, we should be able to do it. My hope is, of course, we don't have to go through what they went through in order to get there.
So I want to end where we began, which is your work with Groundwork. And having said that culture is more important than policy, I have to ask you about one specific policy. And that is that the Republicans seem to have given a lot of tax breaks, but paying for those tax breaks were cuts to Medicaid. And Medicaid is the program that provides health care to people who can't afford it, right? These are poor people, working class people. And I think a lot of people like me, probably, frankly, people in Cambridge, who are, who thankfully we're fortunate enough, we have employer provided healthcare. Can't understand why that coal miner or that person living in Mississippi doesn't see what Republicans are doing to things like Medicaid and think, okay, like the Democrats are fighting for Medicaid and the Republicans are not fighting for Medicaid. Tell me what the eggheads like me in Washington, D.C., or you picked Cambridge, so I'm going to pick on Cambridge. In Cambridge, like, what are we missing? Why isn't that so self-evidently, unless you think I'm wrong about the impact that Medicaid will have on these
Mark,
communities?
I think it's complicated, right? I think on the whole, as you know, right, many, a higher percentage of Medicaid voters, recipients that people that receive are on Medicaid, right, don't vote, right? So, to begin with, right? So, to some extent, Republicans are picking on a constituency that they don't think are likely to vote, so they're not going to get that backlash.
Fair.
Two, traditionally, it actually hadn't cut many of their voters to the extent to which people on Medicaid were voting. They were voting left, not right, so they've been insulated from it. Three, as you well know, they're worried about it this time, which is why they made sure that the cuts to Medicaid take effect after this election, not beforehand, because they are worried that there could be a backlash, and so they're going to try to run through this election and say, oh, well, we didn't feel it, right? Not our fault. So there's all of that. I think there's a bigger piece to this, which is, you talked about this before, of how much do those Medicaid recipients in rural parts of the country actually know about this or hear about it? Because those news channels and communication channels now have been also, they're now to some extent polarized. If they're not getting their news from, Fox News isn't out there saying, hey, by the way, Republicans just cut your health care, rural America. And if you're on Medicaid in Oklahoma, it is your voters it's your senators, it's your House members that actually just voted against you, right? That's not the story they're telling. So to some extent, part of this is, are they receiving this information from a source that they find is credible that they can then internalize for them? The last piece to this that I think is worth understanding, and I don't think it's by no means explains all of it, but what I used to get this question all the time when I was doing fundraisers in New York City or California someplace,
or Cambridge,
right? Saying, hey, Democratic messaging sucks. If Republicans are voting, poor Republicans are voting against their interests. If your message was better, they would vote Democrat.
Right.
Your message stinks. What's your message? Fair point, just as you made. Fair point. I also would point out, say, how many of you want me to raise your taxes? Every hand goes up. Okay, so you're voting against your economic interests too. Yes. But when a poor guy from Kansas does it, you think they're too dumb. Maybe that poor guy from Kansas understands the connection that we're offering, because actually the American public does trust us more on healthcare. One of the few issues they trust Democrats more than Republicans writ large. But they also say, you know what, there's more issues out there that I care about than the healthcare one, either because I don't think I need it, or I can't access it anyway, or it's hard enough, like I can't get to an emergency room, I can't get to a community health center, so like I might as well not have it. Or there's other things that I prioritize on top of that, cultural ones in particular, that mean that you're not going to buy my vote with a couple $100 benefit. And so I don't mean that to say like that unlocks all of this. I think like everything else in this world these days in politics, it's messy. But I do think that rather than Democrats coming back and saying, hey, let me speak louder and slower so that you understand, they'd probably come back and be like, hey, bro, I've been telling you this for 10 cycles. Let me tell you louder and slower so that you understand. No. You want me to vote for you? You're gonna have to offer me something different. Show that you give a shit, without just waving a policy in my face and say, hey, we covered Medicaid for you, but oh yeah, by the way, your kid's struggling with mental illness. Like there's no mental health practitioner in your state that takes Medicaid, and the extent to which there is, there's an 8-month waiting period. So you're offering me Medicaid to cover my kid? Like I can't. So what are you offering me? Turns out not much. Oh, you want me to go to a health center? There isn't one. It closed down. You want me to go to an emergency room? Great. Like, that's an hour and something away. So what, you want to talk Medicaid? Great. Put yourself in my shoes and understand what it takes for me in order to access the care that we need, because you're talking about coverage. Access is another issue. And of course we'd say, well, that's because they haven't invested in it. Fine, that's true. But like pointing out the ways in which Republicans have gutted a system is not the same way of saying we are going to make it better for you.
Right.
And
that's really interesting. I feel like you're right. A lot of us think they're voting against their economic interests, and we're willing to vote against our economic interests, and that somehow that makes us smart. When in fact, maybe they're just your point, they're just as smart. Like every and that is part of the arrogance and the problem that we bring to it.
Maybe. We're trying something new at this point.
Well, you are doing that. You are really one of the great people in Democratic politics. If it has not come across, Joe Kennedy is doing this for all the right reasons and is really making a huge difference. And so I want to thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, sir. Keep up the fight. We need you now more than ever, my friend. Really.
Thanks.
God bless.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Defending Democracy. Please make sure you're subscribed to Democracy Docket's newsletters to get the latest voting rights and democracy news.